My name is Elena, and I'm 34 years old. Last Tuesday evening, I discovered that the two people I trusted most in this world had been conspiring behind my back about the most devastating moment of my life. I had just returned from my evening yoga class, still wearing my workout clothes and feeling that familiar post-exercise calm, when I heard my husband Marcus's voice drifting from our home office. What I heard next would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and the people closest to me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the coastal town of Monterey, California, my older sister Isabella and I were practically inseparable, despite our 4-year age difference. Our parents, both marine biologists who spent most of their time either at the research station or out on boats collecting specimens, often left us to our own devices during the long summer months. Isabella naturally assumed the role of my protector and guide, teaching me everything from how to braid friendship bracelets to navigating the complex social dynamics of middle school. I remember one particularly difficult period when I was 13 and struggling with severe social anxiety. The other kids at school seemed to speak a language I couldn't understand, and I spent most lunch periods hiding in the library, pretending to read while actually fighting back tears. Isabella, who was a senior and practically royalty in our small high school ecosystem, noticed my withdrawal immediately. Instead of dismissing my problems as typical teenage drama, she spent her free periods teaching me confidence-building techniques she had learned from the drama club. Every morning before school, Isabella would sit with me at our kitchen table, coaching me through potential conversations and helping me practice maintaining eye contact. She created elaborate scenarios where I had to introduce myself to imaginary new students or ask teachers questions about assignments. At first, I felt ridiculous role-playing these interactions, but gradually I began to internalize her lessons about speaking clearly and standing up straight. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but by the end of that school year, I had joined the debate team and even made a few genuine friends. Isabella's patient guidance had given me tools that extended far beyond high school hallways. She taught me that confidence wasn't something you either possessed or lacked, but rather a skill that could be developed through practice and self-compassion. When Isabella graduated and left for UC Berkeley to study psychology, I worried that our relationship would fade like so many sibling bonds do when geography intervenes. Instead, the opposite happened. Our weekly phone calls became the highlight of my week, and during her college breaks, we would spend hours walking along the beach, sharing everything from academic stress to relationship confusion. Isabella was there when I experienced my first real heartbreak at 16, bringing me ice cream and terrible romantic comedies while letting me cry on her shoulder without judgment. She celebrated with me when I got accepted to San Diego State University for graphic design, even driving down from Berkeley to help me move into my dorm room. Throughout college, she remained my primary source of emotional support and practical advice, whether I was struggling with a difficult professor or trying to decide between internship opportunities. After graduation, I moved to Portland, Oregon, drawn by the city's thriving creative scene and abundance of design agencies. Isabella had completed her master's degree in clinical psychology and was working at a private practice in San Francisco, specializing in anxiety disorders and family therapy. Despite living in different cities, we maintained our close connection through regular video calls, text message exchanges throughout the day, and visits whenever our schedules aligned. I met Marcus during my second year in Portland at a networking event for young professionals. He was working as a software engineer for a sustainable energy startup, and I was immediately drawn to his passion for environmental causes and his easygoing sense of humor. Marcus had moved to Portland from Chicago, seeking a more balanced lifestyle and opportunities to pursue his interests in hiking and photography alongside his tech career. Our first date lasted 8 hours, beginning with coffee at a small roastery in the Pearl District, and somehow evolving into an impromptu food tour of the city's famous food trucks. Marcus possessed an infectious curiosity about everything from urban planning to local history, and I found myself sharing stories and perspectives I had never articulated before. By the end of that marathon first date, I felt like I had known him for years rather than hours. Marcus and I moved in together after dating for 18 months, finding a charming craftsman house in the Laurelhurst neighborhood with hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, and a kitchen that received perfect morning light. I had landed a position at a mid-sized advertising agency, working on campaigns for outdoor gear companies and local nonprofits, while Marcus had been promoted to lead developer at his startup. Our life together felt effortless in those early years. We developed comfortable routines around cooking elaborate weekend breakfasts, exploring hiking trails throughout the Pacific Northwest, and hosting dinner parties for our growing circle of friends. Marcus supported my decision to freelance part-time so I could pursue personal art projects, and I encouraged his photography hobby, even helping him set up a darkroom in our basement. When I introduced Marcus to Isabella during one of her visits to Portland, I held my breath, hoping my two favorite people would connect. The approval of my sister had always mattered deeply to me, given how instrumental she had been in shaping my confidence and decision-making abilities. To my relief and delight, Isabella and Marcus hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared interest in psychological research and their similar dry sense of humor. Isabella later told me privately that she could see how happy Marcus made me, noting that I seemed more relaxed and self-assured than she had ever seen me. Marcus, for his part, often commented on how much he enjoyed Isabella's visits, appreciating her thoughtful questions about his work and her ability to make everyone feel included in conversations. Their easy friendship felt like a gift, eliminating any potential awkwardness during family gatherings or holiday visits. After 3 years of living together, Marcus proposed during a camping trip to Crater Lake National Park. He had planned the proposal around sunrise at the rim of the caldera, timing it perfectly so that the morning light would illuminate the deep blue water below us. The ring was a vintage Art Deco piece he had found at an estate sale, knowing that I preferred unique, meaningful jewelry over traditional diamond solitaires. Our wedding took place 2 years later in a small ceremony at a vineyard in the Willamette Valley, surrounded by 30 of our closest friends and family members. Isabella served as my maid of honor, giving a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes as she recounted stories of our childhood and expressed her joy at seeing me find such a perfect partner. Marcus's best man was his college roommate David, and the two wedding parties got along so well that several lasting friendships formed that weekend. The early years of our marriage maintained the same comfortable rhythm that had characterized our relationship from the beginning. We bought our first house together, a 1920s bungalow in the Richmond neighborhood that needed significant renovation but offered enormous potential. Marcus threw himself into weekend projects, learning carpentry and plumbing skills through YouTube videos and trial and error, while I focused on design elements like paint colors, fixture selections, and landscaping plans. I transitioned to full-time freelancing, building a client base that
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
included several Portland-based companies and allowing me the flexibility to work from our newly renovated home office. Marcus continued advancing in his career, eventually leaving the startup to join a larger company working on smart grid technology. Our financial situation stabilized, and we began talking seriously about starting a family within the next few years. Isabella visited us regularly, usually staying for long weekends in our guest room and fitting seamlessly into our daily routines. She would join us for our Saturday morning farmers market trips, help with gardening projects in the afternoon, and participate in our weekly game nights with friends. Her relationship with Marcus continued to deepen, and I often found them engaged in lengthy philosophical discussions about everything from artificial intelligence ethics to childhood development theories. During one particularly memorable visit, Isabella helped us paint the guest bedroom, turning what could have been a tedious chore into an afternoon of laughter and storytelling. She shared updates about her therapy practice and the challenging cases she was working with, while Marcus offered perspectives from his experience in team management and problem-solving. I remember feeling overwhelmed with gratitude for how perfectly my sister fit into the life Marcus and I had built together. The first signs of trouble in our marriage emerged gradually, so subtly that I initially dismissed them as normal fluctuations in long-term relationships. Marcus began working longer hours, often staying at the office until 8 or 9 in the evening and bringing his laptop home to continue projects after dinner. When I expressed concern about his increased stress levels, he assured me that it was temporary, related to a major product launch that would settle down within a few months. Those few months stretched into 6, then 9, and eventually a full year of Marcus being emotionally and physically distant. Our weekend renovation project ceased, as he claimed exhaustion from his demanding work schedule. Our elaborate breakfast traditions were replaced by hurried coffee and toast, as Marcus rushed to get to the office early. Even our hiking adventures, which had been such a cornerstone of our relationship, became rare occurrences that required extensive planning and often got canceled at the last minute. More concerning than the changes in our shared activities was the shift in our communication patterns. Marcus, who had always been an enthusiastic conversationalist, began offering brief responses to my questions about his day. When I tried to share details about my freelance projects or ideas for future house improvements, I noticed his attention wandering to his phone or laptop screen. The easy intimacy that had characterized our relationship from the beginning seemed to evaporate without explanation. I attempted several times to address these changes directly, asking Marcus if something was bothering him, or if there were problems at work that he wanted to discuss. Each time, he insisted that everything was fine, that he was simply going through a demanding period professionally and needed my patience while he navigated these challenges. He promised that things would return to normal once his current projects were completed, but those completion dates kept shifting further into the future. During this difficult period, Isabella became my primary source of emotional support, just as she had been during challenging times throughout our lives. Our weekly phone calls often extended to 2 hours as I processed my confusion and hurt about Marcus's behavior. Isabella listened without judgment, offering both practical suggestions for improving our communication and reassurance that many marriages went through similar rough patches. Isabella suggested that Marcus might be experiencing depression or anxiety related to his work stress, pointing out that men often struggle to articulate their emotional needs and may withdraw rather than seek help. She recommended couples counseling and even offered to provide referrals to colleagues she trusted in the Portland area. Her professional background in psychology gave weight to her observations, and I felt hopeful that we could address whatever underlying issues were affecting our marriage. When I broached the subject of counseling with Marcus, however, he immediately dismissed the idea, insisting that we didn't need professional intervention for what he characterized as a temporary rough patch. He seemed almost offended by the suggestion, arguing that seeking therapy would be an overreaction to normal relationship challenges. This resistance puzzled me, given that Marcus had always been open to personal growth and had supported my own therapy sessions during stressful periods in my freelance career. As months passed without improvement, I began to feel increasingly isolated within my own marriage. Marcus and I were sharing the same physical space but seemed to be living parallel lives that rarely intersected meaningfully. We maintained polite interactions around household logistics and superficial pleasantries, but the deeper emotional connection that had drawn us together had seemingly disappeared. I found myself looking forward to Isabella's visits with an intensity that bordered on desperation. During her stays, the house felt alive again with conversation, laughter, and the kind of engaged interaction that had become absent from my daily life with Marcus. Ironically, Marcus seemed to emerge from his withdrawn state during Isabella's visits, participating in dinner conversations and even suggesting activities we could do together as a group. These temporary returns to normalcy during Isabella's presence gave me hope that our marriage problems were indeed temporary and solvable. Marcus would seem like his old self again, cracking jokes and showing interest in my work projects, leading me to believe that perhaps he was simply struggling with issues he couldn't articulate, but that would eventually resolve themselves. However, as soon as Isabella left, Marcus would retreat back into his distant, preoccupied state, leaving me to wonder if I had imagined the brief glimpses of connection we had shared. This pattern continued for months, creating a confusing cycle of hope and disappointment that left me questioning my own perceptions and wondering if I was expecting too much from our relationship. The breaking point came during what should have been a celebration of our 4th wedding anniversary. I had planned a special dinner at the restaurant where Marcus had taken me for our first Portland food tour, hoping to recapture some of the magic from our early relationship. I spent the afternoon preparing for the evening, getting my hair done and wearing a dress that Marcus had always complimented. Throughout dinner, Marcus seemed distracted and uncomfortable, checking his phone repeatedly and offering only minimal responses to my attempts at conversation. When I tried to reminisce about our early dating days and the adventures we had shared, he appeared almost pained by the memories, as if they reminded him of something he had lost and couldn't recover. The evening reached its lowest point when I directly asked Marcus if he still wanted to be married to me, a question that had been building in my mind for months, but that I had been afraid to voice. Instead of immediate reassurance or even acknowledgement of our problems, Marcus was silent for what felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, he said he needed time to think about his answer, effectively confirming my worst fears about the state of our marriage. We drove home in complete silence, both of us seemingly processing the implications of that conversation. I lay awake most of that night, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how we had reached this point. Marcus fell asleep immediately, as had become his pattern, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and growing certainty that our marriage was in serious trouble. The following week, I called Isabella in tears, recounting the anniversary dinner and Marcus's devastating non-answer to my question about our future together. Isabella listened with her characteristic patience and compassion, but I could hear the concern in her voice as she processed what I was telling her. She gently suggested that it might be time for me to consider what I wanted from the marriage, independent of Marcus's unclear intentions. For the first time, Isabella raised the possibility that our marriage might not be salvageable, despite all the love and history Marcus and I shared. She reminded me that I deserved to be with someone who was fully committed to our relationship and who could communicate about problems rather than withdrawing indefinitely. These weren't easy words to hear, but they reflected thoughts I had been trying to avoid confronting. Over the next few days, I found myself observing our interactions with new clarity, paying attention to patterns I had been rationalizing or minimizing. Marcus's withdrawal wasn't temporary or work-related. It was systematic and complete. He had effectively ended our emotional relationship while maintaining the external structure of our marriage, leaving me to function as a roommate rather than a wife. This realization was both devastating and oddly liberating. For months, I had been trying to fix something that was broken beyond my ability to repair, taking responsibility for problems that weren't entirely mine to solve. Acknowledging that our marriage was truly in crisis meant I could finally stop pretending that everything would magically improve and start making decisions based on reality rather than hope. The conversation I had been dreading finally occurred on a rainy Thursday evening in late October. I had spent the day working on a particularly challenging design project, trying to lose myself in creative problem-solving to avoid thinking about the state of my marriage. When Marcus came home from work, I asked if we could sit down and have an honest conversation about our relationship. What followed was the most difficult discussion of my adult life. Marcus finally admitted that he had been unhappy in our marriage for over a year, feeling trapped by what he described as the expectations and responsibilities of married life. He spoke about feeling like he had lost his individual identity and autonomy, though he struggled to provide specific examples of how our relationship had constrained him. When I asked why he hadn't shared these feelings earlier, Marcus explained that he hadn't wanted to hurt me and had hoped his feelings would change over time. This admission was particularly painful because it revealed that he had been making unilateral decisions about our relationship for months, while allowing me to believe we were working through temporary challenges together. The conversation ended with both of us acknowledging that our marriage was effectively over, though neither of us was ready to say those words explicitly. We agreed to take some time apart to think about next steps, with Marcus suggesting he could stay with his friend David for a few weeks while we sorted out logistics. That night, I called Isabella and told her everything that had happened. She listened without trying to offer solutions or optimistic platitudes, simply providing the emotional support I needed to process the end of my marriage. We talked until nearly 2 a.m, with Isabella helping me think through practical considerations like financial arrangements and legal procedures, while also acknowledging the grief I was experiencing. Isabella offered to visit the following weekend to provide support and help me begin figuring out the practical aspects of separation and potential divorce. I gratefully accepted her offer, feeling overwhelmed by the prospect of navigating such a major life change alone. Having my sister's expertise in human psychology, combined with her unconditional love and support, felt essential during this devastating period. Marcus moved out the following Monday, taking only his clothes and personal items, and leaving the house feeling strangely empty despite most of our furniture and belongings remaining in place. The silence that had characterized our recent interactions was replaced by actual physical absence, which was somehow both more honest and more painful than the emotional distance we had been living with. I threw myself into work projects that week, accepting several rush assignments and staying busy enough to avoid sitting alone with my thoughts about the future. Friends and colleagues noticed that something was wrong, but I wasn't ready to discuss the situation publicly, preferring to process my emotions privately before dealing with the social aspects of a separation. Isabella arrived Friday evening, immediately filling the quiet house with her warm presence and practical energy. She had brought groceries for the weekend and a bottle of good wine, planning to cook for me and ensure I was eating properly during this stressful time. Her matter-of-fact approach to supporting me felt exactly right, acknowledging the seriousness of the situation without treating me as fragile or helpless. Saturday morning, we began the process of researching divorce attorneys and understanding the legal requirements for ending a marriage in Oregon. Isabella's clinical training had given her experience with helping clients navigate major life transitions, and she approached our research systematically, taking notes and creating lists of questions to ask potential lawyers. We spent the afternoon walking through my neighborhood, talking through my feelings about the end of my marriage, and beginning to envision what life might look like as a single person again. Isabella helped me identify both the challenges and opportunities that divorce would bring, encouraging me to think beyond the immediate pain toward future possibilities for happiness and fulfillment. That evening, as we were preparing dinner together, I realized how much I had missed having meaningful conversations and shared activities in my daily life. Isabella's visit was reminding me of what healthy, supportive relationships felt like, highlighting just how isolated and disconnected I had become within my marriage. Sunday afternoon, I drove Isabella to the airport, feeling grateful for her support, but also dreading returning to the empty house alone. She promised to call that evening, and reminded me that I was stronger than I realized, capable of rebuilding my life in whatever way felt right for me. The following week passed in a blur of consultations with divorce attorneys, difficult phone calls with Marcus about practical arrangements, and the gradual process of telling close friends about our separation. Each conversation was emotionally exhausting, but also brought a sense of relief as I stopped pretending that everything was fine and began accepting support from people who cared about me. Marcus and I agreed to pursue an uncontested divorce, dividing our assets fairly and avoiding the additional stress and expense of a lengthy legal battle. We scheduled a meeting with a mediator for the following week to work through the details of our agreement, including decisions about our house, shared debt, and personal belongings. Throughout this process, Isabella remained my constant source of emotional support, calling every few days to check on my progress and offer encouragement when I felt overwhelmed by the administrative aspects of ending a marriage. She helped me maintain perspective during moments when grief threatened to derail my forward momentum, reminding me that feeling sad about the end of my marriage was normal and necessary. The mediation session with Marcus was surprisingly civil, though emotionally difficult. We worked through our financial arrangements methodically, with both of us trying to be fair and practical despite the underlying sadness about our relationship's end. Marcus would keep his retirement accounts and newer car, while I would retain ownership of our house and my freelance business equipment. During a break in the mediation, Marcus apologized for handling our marital problems so poorly, acknowledging that his withdrawal and inability to communicate had made the situation much harder than it needed to be. While his apology didn't change the outcome, it provided some closure and helped me feel less confused about what had gone wrong between us. The following Tuesday evening, exactly 1 week after that initial mediation session, I returned home from my yoga class feeling physically tired, but emotionally lighter than I had in months. The divorce paperwork was nearly complete, and while the process had been painful, I was beginning to feel optimistic about rebuilding my life on my own terms. I had planned to spend the evening organizing my home office and responding to emails from potential new clients, taking advantage of my improved emotional state to tackle projects I had been avoiding during the worst of the separation anxiety. As I unlocked the front door and stepped into the entryway, I heard Marcus's voice coming from the direction of our former shared office. My first thought was confusion about why he was in the house, since we had agreed he would call before stopping by to collect any remaining belongings. As I set down my yoga mat and water bottle, I realized he wasn't alone. I could hear Isabella's voice responding to something he had said, though I couldn't make out the specific words from where I stood in the hallway. Relief replaced confusion as I assumed Isabella had made a surprise visit to Portland and had arranged to meet Marcus at the house to discuss something related to our divorce proceedings. It wouldn't have been unusual for her to want to check on both of us during this difficult time, and meeting at the house would have been more convenient than trying to coordinate schedules at a coffee shop or restaurant. I walked quietly toward the office, planning to surprise them both and grateful that Isabella was there to provide support during what I assumed was a difficult conversation between Marcus and me about our separation. As I approached the doorway, their voices became clearer, and I heard Marcus saying something about paperwork and timelines. Just as I was about to announce my presence and join their conversation, I heard Marcus say something that stopped me cold in the hallway. His voice was low but clear as he told Isabella, "She doesn't need to know about this yet. Let's get everything finalized first, and then we can figure out how to tell her." I pressed myself against the wall outside the office, my heart rate immediately accelerating as I tried to process what I had just heard. What didn't I need to know? What were they finalizing without my involvement? And why were Marcus and Isabella having private conversations about matters that presumably concerned me? Isabella's response was quieter, and I had to strain to hear her words. "Are you sure this is the right approach? Elena has been through so much already, and keeping things from her seems—" "Trust me," Marcus interrupted. "This way is better for everyone. She's finally starting to move forward, and this would just complicate everything unnecessarily. We can handle this part ourselves." The blood drained from my face as I realized that my husband and my sister were discussing some aspect of my divorce behind my back, apparently making decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent. The two people I had relied on most during this devastating period were conspiring about something they believed I was better off not knowing. I stood frozen in the hallway, simultaneously wanting to burst into the office and demand explanations and needing more information before confronting them about their secretive conversation. My mind raced through possibilities about what they might be hiding, each scenario more troubling than the last. "The attorney said it could take another 2 weeks," Isabella was saying. "Maybe we should wait until after Elena's meeting with her therapist on Friday. She seemed really positive about starting to date again eventually, and I don't want this to derail her progress." My legs felt weak as I absorbed this information. They were discussing my therapy sessions and my tentative thoughts about future relationships, topics I had shared only with Isabella in confidence. Somehow, this private information was being discussed with Marcus, who was using it to make decisions about what I should or shouldn't know about my own legal proceedings. "That's exactly why we need to handle this quietly," Marcus replied. "She's in a good place right now. Finding out about the house situation would just create unnecessary stress when everything else is going so well." The house situation. My mind immediately jumped to our property settlement, which I thought had been resolved during mediation. What about our house arrangement was Marcus hiding from me? Had he changed his mind about our agreement? Was there some legal complication that I needed to know about? I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to breathe normally while trying to hear more of their conversation. Every word I overheard seemed to reveal additional layers of deception and betrayal, transforming my understanding of both my marriage and my relationship with my sister. "I just think she has a right to know," Isabella was saying, though her voice lacked conviction. "Especially if this affects her long-term financial planning. Elena has always been responsible about money, and keeping her in the dark about this seems—" "Look, I know you want to protect her," Marcus interrupted again, "but sometimes protecting someone means making difficult decisions on their behalf. Elena doesn't need to deal with this right now, and by the time she finds out, everything will be resolved." The patronizing tone in Marcus's voice made my stomach turn. He was talking about me like I was a child who couldn't handle adult responsibilities, enlisting my own sister in a plan to manage my life without my consent. Even worse, Isabella seemed to be going along with his reasoning, despite her apparent discomfort with the deception. I heard the sound of papers rustling and chairs moving, suggesting their meeting was coming to an end. Panic flooded through me as I realized I needed to get away from the office before they discovered I had been listening to their private conversation. I tiptoed quickly back toward the front door, my mind reeling from everything I had just learned. As I reached the entryway, I heard their voices becoming more distant, confirming that they were wrapping up their discussion. I grabbed my yoga mat and water bottle, opened and closed the front door loudly enough for them to hear, and called out, "Hello?" as if I had just arrived home. "Elena?" Isabella's voice called back, sounding slightly strained. "We're in the office. I came by to drop off some paperwork." I walked toward the office, trying to arrange my features into an expression of pleasant surprise, rather than the shock and betrayal I was actually feeling. When I appeared in the doorway, both Marcus and Isabella looked up with smiles that seemed forced and uncomfortable. "Isabella, what a nice surprise," I said, hoping my voice sounded more natural than it felt. "I didn't know you were coming to town." "Last-minute trip," she replied, standing up and giving me a quick hug. "I had some work meetings in Seattle and decided to drive down for the day. Marcus and I were just going over some final details about the property transfer." Property transfer. Those words hit me like a physical blow, though I tried not to let my reaction show on my face. There had been no mention of any property transfer complications during our mediation sessions. What were they referring to, and why hadn't anyone informed me about issues with our house arrangement? "Oh," I said carefully, "I thought we had everything sorted out already. Is there a problem with something?" Marcus and Isabella exchanged a quick glance that confirmed my worst suspicions about their secretive conversation. They had been discussing matters that directly affected me while deliberately keeping me uninformed about important developments in my own divorce proceedings. "Nothing major," Marcus said, his tone too casual to be believable. "Just some paperwork that needed to be filed, boring legal stuff that the attorney wanted to handle directly." I nodded as if accepting his explanation, though every instinct I possessed was screaming that he was lying to me. The conversation I had overheard made it clear that whatever they were hiding was significant enough to warrant secret meetings and discussions about whether I could handle knowing the truth. "Well, I'm glad you two are working together to make everything as smooth as possible," I said, testing their reactions. "It means a lot to me that you're both looking out for my best interests." The guilty expressions that flashed across both their faces confirmed that they were anything but looking out for my best interests. They were making decisions about my life based on their own judgment about what I could or couldn't handle, treating me like an unreliable narrator of my own experience. "Of course," Isabella said quickly. "We just want this whole process to be as easy as possible for everyone involved." Marcus gathered up the papers that were spread across the desk, though not before I caught a glimpse of what appeared to be financial documents and forms I didn't recognize. Whatever they had been discussing involved official paperwork that I apparently wasn't entitled to see or review. "I should get going," Marcus said, avoiding eye contact with me. "David is expecting me for dinner, and I don't want to keep him waiting." As he prepared to leave, I watched him and Isabella carefully, noting the way they seemed to be communicating through glances and subtle gestures. Their behavior suggested a level of coordination and shared understanding that went far beyond what I would have expected from two people who were simply trying to help me navigate a difficult divorce. After Marcus left, Isabella and I sat in the living room, and I struggled to act normal while processing everything I had learned. She asked about my therapy sessions and my work projects, demonstrating knowledge about my recent activities that I now realized she had been sharing with Marcus during their private discussions. "I'm so proud of how well you're handling everything," Isabella said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "You're showing incredible strength and resilience during such a difficult time." The irony of her words was almost unbearable. She was praising my strength while actively participating in deception that undermined my autonomy and right to make informed decisions about my own life. Her compliments felt hollow when I knew she was hiding important information that she and Marcus had decided I couldn't handle. "Thank you," I managed to say. "Having your support has made all the difference. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you." Even as I spoke those words, I felt the foundation of our relationship shifting beneath me. The sister I had trusted with my deepest fears and vulnerabilities was keeping secrets about my divorce, collaborating with my estranged husband in ways that excluded me from decisions about my own future. Isabella stayed for another hour, maintaining the pretense of a normal sisterly visit while I struggled to reconcile the caring, supportive woman sitting across from me with the person I had overheard conspiring against my right to know the truth about my own legal proceedings. After she left, I sat alone in my living room, feeling more isolated and betrayed than I had felt even during the worst moments of my marriage. The divorce from Marcus was painful, but understandable in the context of two people who had grown apart and wanted different things from life. This deception from Isabella cut much deeper, striking at the core of my most fundamental relationship and sense of self. That night, I lay awake replaying every conversation I had had with Isabella over the past few months, wondering what other information she might have shared with Marcus, or what other decisions they might have made without my knowledge. The sister who had taught me confidence and self-advocacy was now treating me like someone who couldn't be trusted with the truth about her own life. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day trying to figure out what Marcus and Isabella were hiding from me. I reviewed all the paperwork from our mediation sessions, looking for clues about what property transfer issues might have arisen since our agreement was finalized. I also began researching my legal rights in divorce proceedings, wanting to understand what kinds of decisions could be made without my direct involvement. The more I learned, the more concerned I became about the implications of Marcus and Isabella's secretive collaboration. By evening, I had made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I was going to confront both Marcus and Isabella about their deception, demanding full disclosure about whatever they were hiding and insisting on my right to be involved in all decisions affecting my divorce and future financial security. The conversation I had overheard had revealed that the two people I trusted most were willing to make major decisions about my life based on their assessment of what I could handle, rather than respecting my autonomy as an adult. This paternalistic approach to protecting me was actually a form of betrayal that threatened to undermine everything I thought I knew about my closest relationships. As I prepared for what would undoubtedly be difficult conversations with both Marcus and Isabella, I reflected on the painful irony of the situation. I was getting divorced because my husband had stopped communicating with me honestly, and now I was discovering that my sister had been participating in the same kind of deceptive behavior. The sister who had taught me to stand up for myself was now going to learn that her lessons had been more effective than she realized. I was going to demand the truth, regardless of what Marcus and Isabella thought I could or couldn't handle, and I was going to insist on being treated as the competent adult I had always been. Tomorrow, everything would change again. But this time, I would be the one driving the conversation, demanding answers, and refusing to accept other people's decisions about what was best for my life. The woman who had been kept in the dark was about to step fully into the light, regardless of what she might discover there. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my internal emotional weather as I prepared for what would likely be the most difficult conversations of my adult life. I had spent most of the night crafting and recrafting what I would say to Marcus and Isabella, trying to find words that would convey both my hurt and my determination to uncover the truth they had been hiding from me. I decided to start with Marcus, reasoning that he might be more likely to reveal information if caught off guard by my knowledge of their secret meeting. I called him at 9 in the morning, knowing he would be at his temporary apartment getting ready for work, and asked if we could meet for coffee before he started his day. "Is everything okay?" he asked, probably hearing something tense in my voice despite my efforts to sound casual. Did something come up with the paperwork? The irony of his question wasn't lost on me, given that paperwork seemed to be exactly what he and Isabella had been discussing without my knowledge. "I just need to talk to you about something," I replied. "It won't take long, but it's important." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near his office, a neutral location, where we had met several times during our separation to discuss practical matters. As I drove across town, I rehearsed different approaches to confronting him about the conversation I had overheard, trying to decide whether direct accusation or strategic questioning would be more likely to yield honest answers. Marcus was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, looking uncomfortable in a way that suggested he might have some idea why I had requested this unexpected meeting. He had ordered coffee for both of us, a gesture that would have felt considerate under different circumstances but now seemed like an attempt to maintain the illusion of normal, friendly interaction. "Thanks for meeting me on short notice," I said as I sat down across from him. "I know your mornings are usually pretty busy." "Of course," he replied, studying my face as if trying to gauge my emotional state. "What did you want to talk about?" I took a deep breath, deciding that direct confrontation was the only approach that would cut through whatever web of deception he and Isabella had constructed. "I heard your conversation with Isabella yesterday evening," I said quietly. "I know you've been discussing aspects of our divorce behind my back." Marcus's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: surprise, guilt, calculation, and finally resignation. He set down his coffee cup and leaned back in his chair, seeming to weigh his options for responding to my accusation. "How much did you hear?" he asked, which was essentially an admission that there had indeed been information worth hiding from me. "Enough to know that you and my sister have been making decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "Enough to know that you've convinced her to keep secrets from me about my own divorce proceedings." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from years of marriage as his response to being caught in situations he couldn't easily talk his way out of. "Elena, it's not what you think. We were trying to protect you from unnecessary stress during an already difficult time." "By lying to me?" I asked, leaning forward across the table. "By treating me like I'm incapable of handling information about my own legal and financial situation? What exactly have you been protecting me from, Marcus?" He was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. "There were some complications with the house transfer," he finally admitted. "Issues that came up after our mediation session that required additional paperwork and legal consultation." "What kind of complications?" I pressed. "And why didn't you or the attorney contact me directly about problems with my own property settlement?" Marcus looked increasingly uncomfortable as I continued questioning him. "The title search revealed some problems with the original deed," he said reluctantly. "Apparently, there was an error in the property description from when we bought the house that needs to be corrected before the transfer can be completed." This information hit me like a physical blow. Problems with our property deed could have serious implications for my financial security and living situation. Yet both Marcus and Isabella had decided I was better off remaining ignorant about these developments while they handled them behind my scenes. "How long have you known about this?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. "About 3 weeks," Marcus admitted, avoiding eye contact. "The attorney discovered it when she was preparing the final transfer documents. She called me because I was listed as the primary contact for legal communications." 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, Marcus had known about serious problems with our property settlement, while allowing me to believe everything was proceeding smoothly. For 3 weeks, he had been discussing these issues with Isabella, while both of them maintained the pretense that I was being kept fully informed about my divorce. "And you didn't think I deserved to know immediately about problems affecting my primary asset and living situation?" I asked, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to remain calm. "We thought it would be better to get more information before worrying you," Marcus said defensively. "Isabella agreed that telling you about potential problems before we knew how serious they were would just create anxiety for no reason." The casual way he referenced Isabella's agreement to deceive me felt like another betrayal layered on top of the original deception. My sister had not only gone along with Marcus's decision to keep me uninformed, but had apparently been an active participant in strategizing about how to manage my emotional responses to information about my own life. "What other decisions have you and Isabella made about what I should or shouldn't know?" I asked. "What other aspects of my divorce have you been handling without my involvement?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Nothing major," he insisted. "Just this one issue with the property deed. Everything else has been handled exactly as we discussed in mediation." I didn't believe him. The conversation I had overheard suggested a level of ongoing collaboration between Marcus and Isabella that went beyond managing a single property issue. They had been discussing my therapy sessions, my emotional state, and my tentative thoughts about dating in the future, indicating a pattern of sharing information and making joint decisions about my personal life. I want to see all the paperwork, I said firmly. Every document, every communication from the attorney, every piece of information you've received about our divorce proceedings. I want complete transparency about what's been happening behind my back. Marcus nodded reluctantly. I can get you copies of everything, he agreed. But Elena, I really was just trying to spare you additional stress during an already difficult time. I wasn't trying to hurt you or undermine your autonomy. Regardless of your intentions, I replied, keeping me uninformed about my own legal proceedings is a form of betrayal. You don't get to decide what I can or can't handle, especially not after our marriage has ended. We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes while I processed everything he had revealed and everything he was likely still hiding from me. The pattern of deception during our marriage had apparently continued even after we decided to divorce, with Marcus maintaining his role as the person who decided what information I needed to access. There's one more thing, Marcus said quietly, seeming to steel himself for an additional confession. The property issue might affect the timeline for finalizing our divorce. If the deed problems are complicated, it could delay everything by several months. Several months. Not only had Marcus and Isabella been deceiving me about serious problems with my property settlement, but they had also been hiding the fact that my divorce might be significantly delayed. This information could affect every aspect of my planning for the future, from my living situation to my financial arrangements to my emotional preparation for moving forward with my life. How long have you known about the potential delays? I asked, though I was almost afraid to hear the answer. About a week, Marcus admitted. The attorney called with the update last Monday. Isabella and I discussed whether to tell you immediately or wait until we had a clearer picture of the timeline. Last Monday. The day after our mediation session, when I had felt optimistic about finally moving forward with my life, Marcus had received information that could derail everything, and he had chosen to keep me in the dark while consulting with my sister about how to manage my emotional reactions. I can't believe this, I said, more to myself than to Marcus. I can't believe you thought you had the right to make these decisions about my life, and I can't believe Isabella went along with it. She was just trying to protect you, Marcus said, though his defense of Isabella only made me angrier. She knows how hard this whole process has been for you, and she didn't want to add more stress if it turned out the problems could be resolved quickly. Stop defending her, I said sharply. And stop defending yourself. You both violated my trust in fundamental ways, and no amount of good intentions justifies treating me like I'm incapable of handling information about my own life. Marcus nodded, seeming to finally understand the seriousness of what he and Isabella had done. You're right, he said simply. I'm sorry. We made a mistake. A mistake implies an error in judgment, I replied. This was a deliberate pattern of deception that continued for weeks. This was a conscious decision to exclude me from important decisions about my own divorce. I stood up from the table, feeling like I had gotten as much information from Marcus as I was likely to get without seeing the actual paperwork he had been hiding from me. I want copies of everything by this afternoon, I told him. Every document, every email, every communication related to our divorce that I haven't seen. I'll get everything together and email it to you, Marcus promised. Elena, I really am sorry. I know I handled this badly. Yes, you did, I agreed. And now I need to have a similar conversation with my sister about her role in this deception. As I drove away from the coffee shop, I felt a mixture of vindication and devastation. I had been right to trust my instincts about the secretive conversation I had overheard, but discovering the extent of the deception was more painful than I had anticipated. The two people I had relied on most during the most difficult period of my life had been systematically lying to me about matters that directly affected my future. I called Isabella from my car, asking if she could meet me for lunch that day. Unlike Marcus, who had seemed nervous about my unexpected request to meet, Isabella sounded genuinely pleased to hear from me and readily agreed to drive down from San Francisco for an impromptu visit. Is everything okay? She asked. You sound a little stressed. I just need to talk to you about something, I replied, using almost the same words I had used with Marcus that morning. Nothing urgent, but important. We arranged to meet at a restaurant near my house. a place where Isabella and I had shared many meals during her visits to Portland. As I waited for her to arrive, I tried to prepare myself for what would likely be an even more painful conversation than the one I had just had with Marcus. Isabella's betrayal cut deeper than Marcus's, because our relationship predated my marriage and had been the foundation of my emotional security for my entire adult life. Marcus had disappointed me by continuing patterns of deception that had characterized the end of our marriage, but Isabella had violated trust that went back decades and had seemed unshakable until yesterday evening. When Isabella arrived, she seemed genuinely happy to see me, giving me a warm hug and commenting on how much better I looked since our last visit. "You seem more relaxed," she observed as we were seated at our table. "I think the decision to divorce was definitely the right choice for you." The irony of her comment about my improved emotional state was almost unbearable, given that she had been actively participating in deception that was designed to manage my stress levels without my knowledge. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about," I said carefully. "Some new information has come to light about the divorce." Isabella's expression immediately became more guarded, and I saw a flicker of something that might have been guilt cross her face. "What kind of information?" she asked, though her tone suggested she might already know what I was referring to. "I know about your meeting with Marcus yesterday," I said directly. "I heard your conversation about keeping information from me regarding problems with the property settlement." Isabella's face went pale, and she set down her water glass with trembling hands. "Elena, I can explain," she began, but I held up my hand to stop her. "Before you explain anything," I said, "I want you to know that I've already spoken with Marcus this morning. I know about the deed problems, the potential delays, and the fact that you've both been discussing my personal life and making decisions about what I should or shouldn't know." Isabella closed her eyes briefly, seeming to gather herself for a difficult conversation. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "I know how this must look, and I know I violated your trust. But Elena, I was genuinely trying to protect you." "By lying to me?" I asked, echoing the question I had posed to Marcus earlier. "By conspiring with my estranged husband to keep me uninformed about my own legal proceedings?" "It wasn't supposed to be a conspiracy," Isabella said defensively. "Marcus called me when the attorney discovered the property issues because he didn't know how to tell you. He was worried about derailing your progress in therapy and your improved emotional state. And you agreed that I couldn't handle the truth about my own divorce?" I asked, leaning forward across the table. "You, who spent years teaching me confidence and self-advocacy, decided I was too fragile to deal with legal complications?" Isabella looked stricken by my characterization of her actions. "It wasn't that I thought you couldn't handle it," she insisted. "I just thought you deserved a break from crisis management while we figured out how serious the problems actually were." "That wasn't your decision to make," I said firmly. "And it certainly wasn't Marcus's decision. I'm the one getting divorced. I'm the one whose housing and financial security are affected by these problems. And I'm the one who should have been informed immediately when complications arose." Isabella nodded slowly, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "You're absolutely right," she admitted. "I got so focused on trying to spare you additional pain that I lost sight of your right to make your own decisions about how to handle information about your life." "How many conversations have you and Marcus had about me?" I asked. "How many times have you discussed my therapy sessions, my emotional state, my personal business behind my back?" Isabella looked increasingly uncomfortable as I pressed her for details about her collaboration with Marcus. "We've talked maybe 4 or 5 times since your separation," she admitted. "Usually he would call when he was worried about how you were handling something, or when he needed advice about how to approach difficult topics with you. 4 or 5 conversations." For months, while I had been confiding in Isabella about my marriage problems and divorce proceedings, she had been maintaining a parallel relationship with Marcus that involved discussing my personal information and strategizing about how to manage my emotional responses. "What else have you told him about our private conversations?" I asked. "What other information have you shared about my therapy sessions, my feelings about the divorce, my thoughts about dating?" Isabella shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Elena, I never shared anything that felt confidential or private. I just gave him general updates about how you were doing emotionally, especially when he was worried about whether certain decisions or conversations might be too stressful for you. You told him I was thinking about dating again, I said, recalling the conversation I had overheard. That's not general information about my emotional state. That's specific personal information that I shared with you in confidence. Isabella looked genuinely surprised by my knowledge of that detail. How did you know about that? She asked. Because I heard you and Marcus discussing it yesterday evening, I replied. You were using my private thoughts about future relationships as evidence that I was in too good a place emotionally to be burdened with information about problems with my divorce. Oh God, Isabella said, putting her head in her hands. Elena, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to feel like a violation of your privacy. I was just trying to give Marcus context for why preserving your emotional stability was so important. By sharing information I had told you in confidence, I said. By discussing my personal life with someone I'm divorcing, without my knowledge or permission. Isabella looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. I know I messed up, she said. I know I violated your trust in ways that are probably unforgivable. But Elena, you have to believe that my intentions were never to hurt you or undermine your autonomy. Intentions don't matter when the actions cause harm, I replied, though seeing my sister cry was making this conversation much more difficult than my confrontation with Marcus had been. The impact of your choices is what matters, and the impact has been to exclude me from important decisions about my own life. We sat in silence for several minutes while Isabella composed herself, and I tried to process the full extent of the betrayal I had uncovered. The sister who had taught me to stand up for myself had been participating in exactly the kind of paternalistic decision, making that undermined everything she had supposedly taught me about self-advocacy. What can I do to make this right? Isabella finally asked. How can I begin to rebuild the trust I've broken? Start by telling me everything, I said. Every conversation you've had with Marcus. Every piece of information you've shared about me. Every decision you've participated in making about my life. I want complete transparency about what's been happening behind my back. Isabella nodded and began recounting her interactions with Marcus over the past several months. The picture that emerged was even more troubling than I had imagined. Marcus had been calling Isabella regularly for advice about how to handle various aspects of our separation and divorce, and she had been providing detailed analyses of my emotional state and recommendations for how he should approach sensitive topics. He called after our anniversary dinner, Isabella admitted, when you asked him directly if he still wanted to be married. He was worried about how to have the separation conversation without completely devastating you emotionally. So you coached him on how to divorce me? I asked, feeling like each new revelation was another blow to my understanding of my closest relationships. I helped him think through how to be honest about his feelings while being as gentle as possible about the process, Isabella clarified. I thought it was better for you if the conversation was handled thoughtfully rather than impulsively. Again, that wasn't your decision to make, I said. You inserted yourself into my marriage in ways that were completely inappropriate, regardless of whether your advice was helpful or harmful. Isabella continued her confession, revealing that she had also discussed my financial situation with Marcus, had provided input on the timing of various divorce-related conversations, and had helped him strategize about how to handle my emotional reactions to different aspects of the separation process. When the property issues came up, she said, Marcus was genuinely panicked about telling you. He was worried that discovering problems with your main asset would trigger a major setback in your emotional recovery from the marriage ending. And you agreed that I was too fragile to handle this information? I asked. I suggested that we get more details from the attorney before involving you, Isabella admitted. I thought it would be better to present you with complete information and potential solutions rather than just problems and uncertainty. That decision resulted in 3 weeks of deception. I pointed out, 3 weeks during which I was making plans and decisions based on incomplete information about my own life circumstances. Isabella nodded miserably. I know. I see now how wrong that was, but at the time it seemed like the kindest approach. Kindness without honesty isn't actually kind, I said. It's manipulative, even when the manipulation is well-intentioned. As Isabella continued recounting her secret collaboration with Marcus, I realized that virtually every major decision or conversation during my separation and divorce had been influenced by their behind-the-scenes strategizing. They had been treating my life like a project that required careful management, rather than respecting me as an autonomous adult capable of handling my own challenges. The worst part, I told Isabella, is that you've been pretending to be my primary source of emotional support while actually functioning as Marcus's consultant about how to manage me. You've been playing both sides of my divorce. Isabella flinched at my characterization of her behavior. It wasn't like that, she protested. I genuinely care about your well-being, and I thought I was helping both of you navigate a difficult situation more smoothly. By keeping secrets from me, I said. By sharing my private information without my consent. By participating in decisions about my life that should have been mine alone to make. You're right, Isabella said quietly. I lost sight of boundaries that should have been obvious. I let my desire to help both of you override my respect for your autonomy and privacy. As our conversation continued, I began to understand how Isabella had rationalized her participation in deceiving me. Her professional training in psychology had given her tools for analyzing emotional dynamics and managing difficult conversations, and she had convinced herself that applying these skills to my situation was a form of caring rather than manipulation. I kept thinking about how fragile you seemed during the worst parts of your marriage, she explained. I remembered how hard it was for you to function when Marcus first started withdrawing, and I didn't want to risk triggering that kind of emotional crisis again. But that's exactly the kind of paternalistic thinking that undermines someone's confidence and autonomy, I pointed out. You were treating me like someone who couldn't be trusted to handle challenges in my own life. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, seeming to process the implications of my criticism. I think I was so focused on protecting you from pain that I forgot pain is sometimes necessary for growth and healing, she said finally. And you forgot that experiencing difficulty is different from being incapable of handling difficulty, I added. I've been dealing with challenging situations my entire adult life. I didn't suddenly become incompetent just because my marriage was ending. As our lunch continued, I found myself grieving not just for the trust that had been broken, but for my understanding of Isabella as someone who had always respected my strength and capability. The sister who had taught me self-advocacy had been practicing exactly the opposite kind of relationship dynamic when she thought I wasn't watching. What happens now? Isabella asked as we prepared to leave the restaurant. How do we move forward from this? I don't know, I admitted. I need time to process what you've told me and figure out how to rebuild trust that's been fundamentally damaged. I need to understand how the person who taught me to stand up for myself ended up participating in decisions that undermined my autonomy. Isabella nodded, tears filling her eyes again. I understand if you need space from me while you work through this. I know I've damaged our relationship in ways that might not be repairable. The relationship definitely can't continue the way it has been, I said. I can't confide in you about personal matters if there's any possibility you'll share that information with other people without my consent. I can't trust your support if you're simultaneously providing advice to people about how to manage my emotional reactions. I want to do whatever it takes to rebuild your trust, Isabella said. I want to understand how I got so far off track and make sure I never violate your boundaries this way again. That's going to require some serious self-reflection on your part, I told her. And it's going to require complete transparency going forward. No more secret conversations. No more strategies for managing my emotional state. No more decisions about what I can or can't handle. As we said goodbye in the restaurant parking lot, I felt emotionally drained from confronting the two most important people in my life about their deception. Both conversations had been necessary, but they had also fundamentally altered my understanding of my relationships and my trust in the people I had relied on most during this difficult period. Driving home, I reflected on the painful irony that my journey toward independence and self-advocacy had been undermined by the very people who claimed to be supporting that growth. Marcus and Isabella had been making decisions about my life based on their assessment of my emotional capacity, rather than respecting my right to make informed choices about my own circumstances. That evening, I received an email from Marcus containing dozens of documents related to our divorce proceedings, including communications from our attorney that I had never seen, and financial analyses that revealed the property problems were more complex than he had initially admitted. Reading through everything, I realized that the deception had been even more extensive than either Marcus or Isabella had confessed during our conversations. The attorney had recommended several different approaches to resolving the deed issues, some of which would have been much more favorable to my financial interests than others. Marcus had been making decisions about which options to pursue without consulting me, apparently in collaboration with Isabella, who had no legal standing in our divorce but had somehow become an unofficial advisor on my behalf. As I read through months of communications that had been kept hidden from me, I felt a growing sense of anger about the extent to which my autonomy had been compromised. Every major decision had been filtered through Marcus and Isabella's assessment of what I could handle, rather than being presented to me as the person whose life was actually affected by these choices. The next few days were a blur of legal consultations as I tried to understand my options for addressing the property issues and ensure that I was being properly represented in all future decisions. I fired the attorney who had been communicating with Marcus instead of me and hired new legal representation that would report directly to me without involving my estranged husband in decisions about my interests. I also began the difficult process of establishing new boundaries with both Marcus and Isabella. With Marcus, this was relatively straightforward since our relationship was already ending, and we could simply implement more formal communication protocols for the remainder of our divorce proceedings. With Isabella, the process was much more complex because I wanted to preserve our relationship while fundamentally changing its dynamics. I told her that all future communication between us would need to be direct and transparent, with no side conversations involving other people in my life and no sharing of personal information without my explicit consent. "I need you to function as my sister, not as my case manager," I explained during a difficult phone conversation. "I need you to trust my ability to handle information and make decisions about my own life, even when those decisions might result in emotional difficulty or practical challenges." Isabella agreed to these new boundaries, though I could tell she was struggling to understand how her previous behavior had been problematic. Her professional training had given her tools for managing challenging emotional situations, and she had become accustomed to applying those tools to our personal relationship in ways that undermined the equality and reciprocity that healthy adult relationships require. Over the following weeks, as I worked with my new attorney to address the property issues that Marcus and Isabella had been handling behind my back, I began to understand the full extent of the problems they had been trying to shield me from. The deed complications were serious and would likely delay my divorce by several months, just as Marcus had eventually admitted. However, I also discovered that there were several different approaches to resolving these issues, and the strategy that Marcus had been pursuing was not necessarily the one that would be most beneficial to my long-term financial interests. Because I had been excluded from decision-making, I had lost opportunities to advocate for solutions that would better serve my needs. "Why wasn't I consulted about these different options?" I asked my new attorney during our first meeting. "According to the notes in your file," she replied, "your previous attorney was told that you preferred to have your husband handle communications about complex legal matters, because the stress was affecting your emotional stability." I felt a chill as I realized that Marcus and Isabella's deception had extended to my legal representation. They had not only been making decisions about my divorce behind my back, but had actually instructed my attorney to exclude me from communications about my own case. I never gave anyone permission to make that arrangement. I told my new attorney I was deliberately kept uninformed about problems with my property settlement and excluded from decisions about how to resolve those problems. My new attorney looked concerned as she reviewed the file more carefully. "This is highly irregular," she said. "You should have been consulted about every decision affecting your interests, regardless of any emotional considerations." As we worked together to assess my legal situation and develop new strategies for resolving the property issues, I realized that Marcus and Isabella's well-intentioned deception had actually put me at a significant disadvantage in my own divorce proceedings. By excluding me from important decisions and communications, they had compromised my ability to advocate for my own interests during a crucial period. Moving forward, my new attorney said, "All communications will go directly to you, and all decisions will require your explicit approval. No one else will be authorized to speak on your behalf or receive information about your case. This felt like a small victory in my effort to reclaim control over my own life, but it also highlighted how much autonomy I had lost due to other people's decisions about what I could or couldn't handle. The path forward would require not only resolving the practical complications of my divorce, but also rebuilding my confidence in my ability to manage challenges without other people's intervention. As the weeks passed, I began to appreciate the difficult position I had been placed in by Marcus and Isabella's deception. Not only had I been excluded from important decisions about my own life, but I had also been led to believe that I was being kept fully informed about all developments in my divorce proceedings. This meant that I had been making other life decisions based on incomplete and inaccurate information. I had been planning my post-divorce finances around a property settlement that was actually much more uncertain than I had been told. I had been making emotional preparations for a specific timeline that was actually highly variable depending on legal developments I hadn't been informed about. The ripple effects of their deception extended far beyond the immediate legal complications. I had to reconsider every aspect of my planning for the future, from my living arrangements to my career decisions, to my emotional preparation for independence. Everything I thought I knew about my situation had been filtered through other people's judgments about what I needed to know. Perhaps most importantly, I had to rebuild my confidence in my own judgment and decision-making abilities. For months, Marcus and Isabella had been treating me like someone who couldn't be trusted with complete information about my own life, and I had internalized some of their doubt about my emotional stability and practical competence. Recovery from their betrayal required not only addressing the immediate practical problems they had created, but also reclaiming my sense of myself as a capable adult who could handle whatever challenges life presented. I had to remember that experiencing difficulty was not the same as being incapable of managing difficulty, and that other people's discomfort with my potential emotional reactions did not justify excluding me from decisions about my own future. The sister who had taught me confidence and self-advocacy had inadvertently undermined both qualities by treating me as someone who needed protection from the realities of my own life. Rebuilding our relationship would require her to remember and respect the lessons she had taught me, allowing me to apply those skills even when doing so might result in emotional difficulty or practical challenges. As I worked through the complex emotions surrounding these betrayals, I began to understand that the end of my marriage had revealed not only problems in my relationship with Marcus, but also unhealthy dynamics in my relationship with Isabella that had been masked by her genuine care and good intentions. Moving forward would require establishing new foundations for both relationships based on honesty, respect for my autonomy, and trust in my ability to handle whatever information and challenges life presented. The woman who had been kept in the dark was determined to step fully into the light, regardless of what she might discover there. 3 months after confronting Marcus and Isabella about their deception, I found myself sitting in a completely renovated home office, surrounded by evidence of the new life I was building on my own terms. The legal complications with my property deed had finally been resolved, though not without significant cost and stress that could have been minimized if I had been involved in the decision-making process from the beginning. My new attorney had proven to be both competent and respectful of my autonomy, consulting with me about every decision and ensuring that I understood all my options before proceeding with any legal strategies. Working with her had been a revelation after months of being excluded from my own divorce proceedings, and the contrast highlighted just how inappropriate Marcus and Isabella's management of my situation had been. The property settlement had ultimately been resolved in a way that was more favorable to my interests than the approach Marcus had been pursuing without my knowledge. By advocating for myself and exploring all available options, I had been able to secure arrangements that better protected my financial security and housing stability. This outcome validated my insistence on being included in decisions about my own life, even when those decisions involved complex legal and financial considerations. My divorce was finally finalized on a crisp morning in early February, almost 6 months later than originally anticipated, due to the property complications that Marcus and Isabella had tried to shield me from. Standing in the courthouse with my attorney, signing the final documents that legally ended my marriage, I felt a mixture of sadness about the relationship that had failed, and pride about the strength I had discovered in advocating for myself through the most challenging period of my adult life. The relationship with Marcus had evolved into something resembling distant but respectful coexistence. We communicated only when necessary about practical matters related to finalizing our divorce, and he had largely respected the boundaries I had established about direct communication without third-party involvement. His attempts to apologize for the deception had been sincere but limited, suggesting that he still didn't fully understand why his paternalistic approach to protecting me had been so damaging. During one of our final conversations before the divorce was completed, Marcus had expressed confusion about why I remained angry about his decision to involve Isabella in managing my emotional responses to challenging information. I really was just trying to help, he had insisted. I thought having your sister's support would make everything easier for you. Help would have been providing me with complete information and trusting me to handle it appropriately, I had replied. What you did was make decisions about my life based on your assumptions about my emotional capacity, which is the opposite of helpful. The conversation had ended with Marcus acknowledging that he had made serious errors in judgment, though I remained uncertain whether he truly understood the fundamental problems with treating another adult as incapable of handling information about their own circumstances. His growth and understanding were no longer my responsibility, but I hoped for his sake that he would learn from these mistakes in future relationships. The situation with Isabella had proven more complex and emotionally fraught to navigate. Unlike Marcus, whose role in my life was ending along with our marriage, Isabella was my sister, and I wanted to preserve our relationship while fundamentally changing its dynamics. This required both of us to examine patterns of interaction that had developed over decades, and that neither of us had previously recognized as problematic. Isabella had entered therapy to explore how her professional training in psychology had influenced her personal relationships in unhealthy ways. She was working with a therapist who specialized in boundary issues and power dynamics, trying to understand how she had justified participating in decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent. I think I convinced myself that my professional expertise gave me special insight into what would be best for you emotionally, Isabella had explained during one of our careful conversations about rebuilding our relationship. I lost sight of the fact that expertise in psychology doesn't give someone the right to make decisions for another adult, even when those decisions are well-intentioned. These conversations with Isabella were more emotionally challenging than my interactions with Marcus, because they required me to confront the possibility that patterns of inequality and disrespect had characterized our relationship for much longer than I had realized. Isabella's role as my protector and guide during childhood and adolescence had naturally evolved into an adult dynamic, where she assumed authority over decisions that should have been mine alone. Looking back, I had told Isabella during one particularly difficult conversation, "I can see times when you made decisions about what I should or shouldn't know, or how I should handle various situations, without recognizing that those decisions weren't yours to make." Isabella had been initially defensive about this observation, pointing out all the ways she had supported my independence and self-advocacy over the years. However, as she continued working with her therapist and reflecting on our relationship patterns, she began to acknowledge that her desire to protect me had sometimes undermined the very autonomy she thought she was fostering. "I think I was so proud of the confidence I had helped you develop that I wanted to continue managing the conditions that supported that confidence," she had admitted. "I didn't want to see you struggle or fail, so I tried to create situations where you would be successful rather than trusting you to handle whatever challenges came your way." This insight had been both painful and liberating for both of us. It explained not only Isabella's participation in the divorce deception, but also numerous smaller incidents over the years where she had intervened in my decisions, or provided unsolicited advice about how to handle various situations. Her protectiveness had been genuine, but it had also been controlling in ways that neither of us had fully recognized. Rebuilding trust with Isabella required establishing completely new patterns of interaction based on explicit respect for my autonomy and decision-making authority. We developed agreements about communication that prohibited her from sharing my personal information with anyone without my explicit consent, and that required her to ask permission before offering advice about my personal decisions. "I need you to trust that I can handle whatever information or challenges come my way," I had explained. "Even if handling those challenges means experiencing emotional difficulty, or making decisions you wouldn't make yourself." Isabella had struggled initially with these new boundaries, particularly when I was dealing with stressful situations where she felt her professional expertise might be helpful. Learning to offer support without attempting to manage or control my responses required her to fundamentally reconsider her role in our relationship and her assumptions about what caring for someone actually meant. The process of rebuilding trust was slow and sometimes frustrating for both of us. There were moments when Isabella would slip back into old patterns of assuming she knew what was best for me, and times when I was hypersensitive to any suggestion that she might be trying to manage my emotional responses. We both had to learn new ways of relating to each other that honored both our love for each other and my right to make independent decisions about my own life. One significant breakthrough came when Isabella was facing her own professional crisis and needed emotional support without trying to simultaneously manage my reaction to her problems. Her therapy practice was being investigated for billing irregularities that had been caused by her office manager's embezzlement, and she was dealing with potential damage to her professional reputation and financial security. When Isabella called me in tears about the investigation, my first instinct was to offer practical advice and emotional support, without trying to shield her from the stress of the situation or make decisions about how she should handle the crisis. This role reversal helped both of us understand what supportive relationships should look like when they're based on respect for each other's competence and autonomy. "This is what I should have done for you during your divorce," Isabella had said after I spent several hours listening to her concerns and helping her think through her options without trying to make decisions for her. "I should have trusted you to handle the challenges and offered support without trying to control the process." As winter turned into spring, I began to feel genuinely optimistic about my future for the first time since my marriage had started deteriorating. My freelance business was thriving, partly because I had more time and energy to devote to creative work, now that I wasn't constantly managing relationship stress and confusion about my legal situation. I had also started dating casually, something that would have been impossible when I was still questioning my own judgment and decision-making abilities. The confidence I had rebuilt through advocating for myself during the divorce process had restored my faith in my ability to navigate complex interpersonal situations and make good choices about whom to trust with my emotional vulnerability. The dating process was revealing in unexpected ways, highlighting how much my standards for relationships had evolved through the experience of confronting deception and rebuilding trust. I found myself much more attuned to patterns of communication and respect for boundaries that I might have overlooked or rationalized in the past. During one particularly illuminating conversation with a man I had been seeing for several weeks, he made a comment about knowing what was best for me in a situation where I had expressed uncertainty about a career decision. The casual assumption that he could assess my interests better than I could myself immediately raised red flags that would have been invisible to me before my experience with Marcus and Isabella's paternalistic approach to protecting me. "I appreciate your concern," I had told him, "but I'm perfectly capable of weighing my options and making decisions about my own career. What I need from people who care about me is support for whatever decision I make, not advice about what decision I should make." His defensive response to my boundary setting told me everything I needed to know about his suitability as a partner. The version of myself who had tolerated Marcus's emotional withdrawal and Isabella's well-intentioned control would have tried to smooth over the conflict and accommodate his discomfort with my assertiveness. The person I had become through confronting those betrayals recognized that anyone who couldn't respect my autonomy wasn't worth my time or emotional investment. This clarity about what I needed from relationships extended beyond romantic connections to friendships and professional relationships as well. I found myself less willing to tolerate people who assumed they knew what was best for me, or who tried to manage my emotional responses to challenging situations. The experience of having my autonomy violated by the people closest to me had made me much more protective of my right to make independent decisions and experience whatever consequences resulted from those decisions. My relationship with my parents had also evolved as I became more assertive about boundaries and expectations. They had initially been confused and somewhat hurt by my anger toward Isabella, viewing her participation in the divorce deception as well-intentioned sisterly support rather than a violation of appropriate boundaries. "Isabella was just trying to help you through a difficult time," my mother had said during one conversation about the family tensions that had resulted from my confrontation with my sister. "She's always looked out for you, and I don't understand why you're so upset about her continued care and concern." Explaining to my parents why good intentions didn't justify violating my autonomy had required me to articulate principles about adult relationships that I was still developing through my own experience. It had also forced me to examine ways that my parents had contributed to family dynamics that normalized making decisions for other adults based on assumptions about their emotional capacity or need for protection. Care and concern should involve respecting someone's right to make their own decisions and handle their own challenges, I had explained to my mother. Love that tries to control or manage someone else's life isn't actually loving, even when it feels caring to the person providing it. These conversations with my parents had been difficult but ultimately productive, leading to greater clarity about expectations and boundaries that would support healthier relationships with both them and Isabella going forward. They had gradually come to understand that my insistence on autonomy wasn't a rejection of family support, but rather a redefinition of what supportive relationships should look like. By summer, I had established new routines and relationships that reflected the person I had become through navigating the challenges of divorce and betrayal. My home felt truly mine for the first time, decorated and arranged according to my preferences without the compromise that marriage requires. My work schedule allowed for creative projects that brought me satisfaction and fulfillment beyond financial compensation. My social life included people who respected my independence while offering genuine connection and support. Isabella and I had reached a new equilibrium in our relationship that honored both our love for each other and our respective autonomy. She had made significant progress in therapy and was actively working to apply what she had learned about boundaries and respect to our interactions. While our relationship would never return to the uncomplicated closeness we had shared before the divorce deception, it had evolved into something more honest and sustainable. I think our relationship is actually healthier now, Isabella had observed during one of our regular phone calls. I understand you better as an independent adult, rather than someone who needs my guidance and protection. And I think you trust me more now that we've established clear boundaries about what's appropriate and what isn't. She was right. The process of confronting the betrayal and rebuilding trust had ultimately strengthened our relationship by forcing us to address underlying patterns that had been problematic for years. Isabella's respect for my autonomy was now conscious and intentional rather than assumed, and my trust in her was based on demonstrated behavior rather than historical loyalty. The experience had also taught me valuable lessons about the difference between support and control that I was able to apply to all my relationships. True support involved trusting someone's ability to handle whatever challenges they faced, even when those challenges were difficult or painful. Control, regardless of how well-intentioned, involved making decisions for someone else based on assumptions about their emotional capacity or need for protection. As I reflected on everything I had learned through the dissolution of my marriage and the rebuilding of my relationships, I realized that the divorce deception had ultimately been a gift, though a painful one. It had forced me to confront patterns of dependence and inequality that I might never have recognized otherwise, and it had required me to develop skills for advocacy and boundary setting that were serving me well in all areas of my life. The woman who had been kept in the dark about her own divorce proceedings had emerged into full sunlight, capable of handling whatever information and challenges life presented. The sister who had learned to stand up for herself was now teaching others, through example, what healthy relationships based on mutual respect and autonomy could look like. Standing in my garden on a warm evening in late August, watering the vegetables I had planted in what used to be Marcus's photography space, I felt genuinely grateful for the difficult journey that had brought me to this place of independence and clarity. The betrayal that had initially felt devastating had ultimately catalyzed growth and self-discovery that might not have occurred under easier circumstances. My phone buzzed with a text from Isabella asking if I wanted to meet for coffee the following week when she would be in Portland for a conference. The fact that she was asking rather than assuming I would be available, and that she was respecting my schedule rather than expecting me to accommodate hers, reflected the growth we had both achieved in learning to relate to each other as equal adults. I'd love to, I texted back. There's a new place I've been wanting to try. My treat this time. The simple exchange represented everything I had learned about relationships built on mutual respect rather than old patterns of dependence and protection. Isabella and I would continue to be sisters, but we would be sisters who honored each other's independence and trusted each other's judgment about how to handle whatever challenges and opportunities life presented. As the sun set behind the mountains that surrounded my city, I felt profound satisfaction with the life I had rebuilt from the wreckage of deception and betrayal. The house was mine, the decisions were mine, and the future was mine to create according to my own values and priorities. The woman who had once been excluded from important decisions about her own life was now the primary author of her own story, capable of handling whatever plot twists and challenges lay ahead. The journey from betrayal to empowerment had been painful and difficult, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as devastating losses, and sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who ultimately teach us the most about our own strength and capacity for growth. I had learned that I was capable of far more than anyone, including myself, had ever imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.